It's about 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. Excuse me. I wasn't coughing until then. I moved them all to the last cell, so the 7th cell of this 5th row. So this is the end of the, let's see, 2.5 weeks. So what is that, like 17 days I've been doing this? This rotation, we're covering the southern half of my 60 acres in 5 weeks. So this marks, next row marks the beginning of the second half of this rotation. So we're about 3/4 of the way through my field right now. And I made a little mistake. This area is a little bit bigger than the other cells. It'll be fine. And the only reason the cows will go back to the beginning is to get some water. There's really nothing there for them to eat. So I've got some goat weed here. This is goat weed. I've got some other weeds too. I forget what this one was called, but I remember looking into it. And this is a weed that shows up in disturbed soils. It is perennial, I believe, so it won't die on its own. If it doesn't go away, I'll probably have to cut it down myself. There's not too much of it. But just a general sentiment on weeds. Oh, by the way, I should mention the weather. It's about 35 degrees right now. It's going to be 50 something degrees today. So I don't expect it to be very cold. But anyway, a little bit on this weed. This shows up in disturbed soils. It's perennial. And a lot of weeds are that way. So the things that we call weeds are typically things that we don't want to see in our farm or pasture. And they do play a role in the ecosystem, though. Nature has a way of doing things. There's really two ways, and it's, again, metaphysics and philosophy. The question that every farmer has to wrestle with is nature trying to hurt you or help you, right? And so are you going to have nature as your enemy or as your ally, right? And this style of grazing, rotational grazing, is really focused on not trying to force nature to do things that it doesn't want to do, but gently encouraging it to do the things that we want it to do, right? And we do that by studying nature, understanding the processes that happen naturally, and then trying to gently change conditions to encourage those processes. And I'll give you an example. Like, we studied grass, and we know that grass does well when you cut it 1/3 of the length, right? So if you take a long blade of grass and you cut off the top third, it seems to respond well. It develops healthy root systems and things like that. It grows back quickly, and it's vibrant, you know. So that's what we do, is we want to cut the grass only 1/3 of the length. The other thing is we want to encourage root growth. Root growth, especially the deeper the roots go, it encourages drought tolerance and resistance. It increases nutrition and overall soil health. And so the weeds are things that we don't necessarily want. Like, I didn't wake up 1 year ago and say, I really want more goat weed in my pasture, right? But I got it, right? So weeds are not necessarily things we want. However, nature has a way. Nature has her way of doing things. And I'm not here trying to make nature my enemy. I want to use her to help me make some money and food and things like that. So rather than shred the goat weed this year, I've shredded the goat weed the past 2 years. Last year I shredded like 2/3 of my field, probably 3/4 of my field actually. And I didn't shred the southernmost part of the field, partly because I'm lazy. The cows were in that part of the field. I didn't want to cross the wire, but also because I wanted to see what would happen. And the answer is nothing. It didn't change anything. The goat weed in the northern 2/3 and the goat weed in the southern 2/3, there's no difference. So shredding didn't seem to do anything. If anything, I might be tempted to say that the goat weed leaving the goat weed alone actually helped the soil grow back better. So that's kind of the story on weeds. Is I don't really understand them. I don't know why they're here. I would like to read a book about each of these weeds, like 50 pages on what exactly they're doing and what kind of changes they make to the soil, and maybe even like what wildlife needs the weeds. It turns out goat weed is a major source of food in the winter for a variety of native birds. And by destroying all the goat weed, we're depriving those birds of that food. And with the birds comes a lot of other things that we want to see on our pasture. So we want living pastures full of living soil, living plants, and living animals. We don't want to recreate the sterile conditions of a laboratory or hospital, right? That's not what we're trying to do here. Anyway, yeah, so this weed is everywhere. There's some more of it. I remember I looked into it. The cows can eat it. It's not necessarily going to kill them. If they eat too much, it's bad. Why would a cow eat too much of something? Because they're starving to death. But if you provide them lots of options, they'll eat the things that they need and want. And I have seen cows in the past. I've opened up areas for grazing, and the cows rushed towards the goat weed and started eating the goat weed, right? So there's something in the goat weed the cows want. Now, that said, the cows didn't graze all my goat weed to zero. There is one spot where they did that, but that was more because they were probably out of food than anything else. So anyway, that's kind of the story on weeds. And some of you are inclined to spray chemicals and things on the field to get rid of the weeds. My inclination, mostly born out of ignorance, because I don't know much about farming and I didn't grow up in this environment. I'm a programmer by trade, at least I used to be. But my inclination is to see what happens. In my long history of bug fixing in software, when I was young, my instinct was to start changing things and see if we can get the bug to go away. But as I became older, the first thing I would do is see if I can reproduce the problem, right? This might be valuable for farmers to know. So a bug report comes in, somebody says, it's not working, right? And you try to get as much information as you can about what's not working. And generally the information you need is what did you expect to happen versus what actually happened. And you need some kind of specific steps to get to where you got, right? So if somebody says the program's not working, fix it, I can't do much with that. So I'll ask a question like, what did it do, right? And then they'll say something like, I pushed this button and then this happened, right? And since I programmed the thing, I'm kind of like, yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. So then the next question is, what did you expect? What did you want to happen, right? What did you think should have happened? There's Snowball, by the way. Hi, Snowball. Snowball likes to chase the ducks. What should have happened? And then they'll say, I should have seen this or that, and instead I saw that. So I'm like, okay, now I have something to work with. So then I'll go, and the very first thing I'll do is I'll try to reproduce the bug. So I'll try to do exactly what he did and see if I see the same thing. If I don't see the same thing, then that can mean a number of things. One of the things it can mean is that, I got a bad bug description. I can't reproduce it because I don't know enough about what actually happened. Another more nefarious thing is that the bug is actually transient. It just shows up sometimes and not other times. Those ones are usually harder to catch. So you have to be really careful documenting like the exact conditions that occurred when you didn't see the bug or when you did see the bug, right? But the important thing is that you reproduce the bug, right? You show that it can be done over and over again. And you show that you understand the conditions that need to happen for the bug to appear. The next thing, and after that, most programmers, they get an idea of what's wrong and they run off and they go fix it, right? Well, 90% of the time, that's the right thing to do, right? 90% of the time, it's a simple bug. Yeah, we understand it. We've seen things like this before. I know how to fix it, right? But too often, that's the wrong thing to do, right? And the reason why is, especially for really difficult bugs, which I would classify weeds growing in your field as a very difficult bug. If you go start changing things just based on hunches and ideas, and the symptom disappears, then you're likely to think that your changes cause the symptom to disappear. That certainly sounds reasonable, right? But in the case of really weird bugs, that may not be the case. It may have just been random chance that the bug disappeared. It could be because of some secondary thing the bug disappeared, but the bug is still there and will reappear in a different form. So what you have to do is you have to perform experiments, and you have to basically convince yourself that that's actually the thing that's causing the bug. And so one of the tools that we programmers have is we have a debugger. We can run the program and we can see the exact condition and state of the program at each line of code. We can also put in logging statements that show what is happening in the system right before the event happens, right? And so the idea is that we actually show that yes, that variable was set to this and this function was called when the bug manifested. And so now we have like very specific conditions for the bug that we can actually write little software tests to demonstrate. And then fixing it is just a trivial matter of changing the code to do the right thing instead, right? So that's kind of the way you actually solve a bug in real life. And I know that near the end of my career, people would get frustrated with me because there would be these esoteric bugs, and I would tell everybody, calm down and slow down, right? Just because you think it's this doesn't mean it is. You need to prove it. You need to show it. You need to do experiments and investigate. Because all too often, you run out and change something, and now you got two bugs. Except the bad part is that first bug is even more hidden, right? And so you didn't even solve the problem, you just made it worse because now it's in hiding, and now you added a second problem, right? So you have to be very careful about that kind of thing. Applying that to agriculture, well, you always have to be experimenting with what you're doing. You always have to be ready to change. You always have to be paying attention to what other people are doing, because you only have one field or one farm, and you need the information from what everybody else is doing, okay? You need to form theories about what's actually going on. You need to test those theories, right? I was kind of thinking about this last night as I go to sleep. I'm like, what if I died, right? And my kid said, I want to do what my dad was doing. I want to continue the farm. And rather than like read the books and do the study and put in the time and effort to learn how to do it, he just copied what I was doing. So he pulled up my notes and he said, oh, that's what Dad was doing. I'm just going to keep doing that forever. And if my kid did that, I would come back out of the grave and slap him on the face and say, that's exactly what I wasn't doing. I wasn't blindly copying somebody. I had a theory. I had an idea. I was doing experiments. I was changing constantly the practices. I'm trying to develop knowledge, actual knowledge about what's really going on inside the soil, right? And I'm constantly studying and reading and listening to what other people have to say about things, And another thing too, this is something that bothers me, is people get stuck talking to people that they agree with and not listening to people they disagree with, right? And there's a lot of reasons why we get stuck in that pattern. It's not fun listening to people that disagree with you, especially if that person is combative and angry and mean, right? The problem is, though, is you have the tendency to build up an echo chamber where the people who talk to you are just reflecting ideas that you've already had, or you're doing the same to them, right? So somebody says regenerative agriculture is great, and the crowd says, yay, regenerative agriculture is great. And so you build this feedback loop where it's impossible to detect actual information from just regurgitated observations or ideas, right? Ideas and observations that could be wrong, right? How many times have we gone back in science and looked at the experiment that somebody actually performed and said, you know what? That experiment was not a very good experiment. And what you were measuring was not what you thought you were measuring. It's something else. Even worse, the person who did the research committed fraud. They lied about what they saw. They changed the numbers, and they've been deceiving the world, right? So you have to be paying attention to different ideas. In the physics community, we had, I think they call them crackpots. Yeah, crackpots. So these are people that aren't educated in physics, that have some ideas about how the universe works, and they tend to have a very combative approach towards actual physicists. Because they'll say something and the physicists will just ignore them. They won't even talk to them. And in the rare case when somebody, usually grad student or undergrad student, decides to engage them, there's a disconnect between the very ideas they're having and what the little physics student is saying. And so there's really no common ground to establish a link, where actual communication can occur. The crackpot's talking about things that aren't even measurable. You can't even experiment with it. And the physicist is talking about things that the crackpot just wants to ignore, right? So there might have been a famous experiment in physics history, and the physics student will say like, hey, did you actually read what this guy did on that experiment? And the crackpot will say, oh, he's lying and making it up, right? And the crackpot talks about some weird frequency attunement or whatever of the spiritual realm, and the physics student says, well, I'd like to see some numbers, some experiments that you've done with that. Theory's nice, but we need to see experiments, and so on and so forth. There's just a disconnect between the two. So I understand that listening to people with different ideas than you is very difficult and it's not fun. However, it's something you have to be willing to do. I think a good test is how you respond to people that are flat earthers, right? So a common response, and the wrong response, is to say, well, my science teacher told me the earth is round, so you're wrong, right? Don't do that, please. I do encourage you, if you have some free time and you want to exercise your brain muscles, to actually sit down and listen to a flat earther and try to understand what they're trying to say. And seriously consider their ideas, right? Consider for a moment that maybe they're right? Maybe they're right. And you sit down and you listen to what they have to say. And you try to form, your little theories and hypotheses and experiments. And I want you to figure out how you would prove or disprove flat earth theory according to their comments and observations, right? And then once you start to realize that this is a really good, valuable exercise, how do you know from your direct observation, not from somebody telling you, but how do you know from your direct observation, your direct reasoning, that the earth is round, right? How do you know? Can you calculate the radius of the earth, the diameter of the earth, the circumference of the earth? Can you calculate that? Just by looking. That's an interesting problem now, isn't it? Right? If the earth is round, then it should be measurable, right? If the earth is flat, that should be measurable too. How flat is it? How big is the earth? Things like that. So the reason why I say pay attention to them and listen to them is not because they're right, but because you need to be able to engage at a logical and reasonable level with not just flat earthers, but everything, right? So a farmer comes to you and says like, oh, you got to do this, this, and that. Are you just going to say like, well, I don't like you, you smell bad, and I'm going to kick you in the shins and tell you to get off my property? Or are you going to say like, oh, you have the gospel truth, praise Jesus, we're doing what you say because you're smarter than I am, right? Somewhere in between, there's the right response. Somewhere in between, there's the right responses in there, right? So how do you find what that right response is? Maybe the farmer is right. Maybe he's completely wrong. How do you know? Right? How do you figure it out? That's what science really is about. So anyway, if my kids just blindly did what I did, I would be upset. If they copied my patterns and just kept repeating it. Now, maybe that this pattern is the right one. Maybe it's the best one there is, and so if it was and they did that, then they'd see massive success. But they wouldn't be any closer to understanding why. And they won't be able to tell their neighbors like what they need to do for their pasture, right? And so, yeah, you'll have success, but you can't replicate that success. And what good is that? If it's just one little corner of success and nobody else can share in that success. So Anyway, that's my thoughts today. Guys, have a great day. Take care and bye-bye.